Knights of Ren. Cool.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan. So Ahsoka is almost here, and we think that it's entirely possible that this show could be connected to the origins of Adam Driver's best Star Wars character. Matt, the radar technician?
That thing looks dangerous, man. Poorly made, like a little kid made it.
Then you don't have to look at it anymore!
Okay, second best, Kylo Ren. In fact, the Knights of Ren could be the very key to bringing Thrawn back to the known universe. But to understand any of that, we need to talk about who they are, where they're from, and why the Knights of Ren even exist in the first place.
I'm looking forward to having some real talk with some real folks.
Wait, I thought the Knights of Ren were just like those guys in Rise of Skywalker.
Master of the Knights of Ren.
But there's so much more than that, and I can't wait to explain this to you guys. Now, Dave Filoni has done a really great job of expanding the lore between the original trilogy and the sequels, and this is going to continue with Ahsoka. So the Knights of Ren were barely seen in the sequel movies. They were name-dropped in Force Awakens, and then they kind of do some stuff in Rise of Skywalker. But they have some incredible lore that really builds Kylo Ren into a much more nuanced character.
How did we not know about this?
And there's a chance that we could see the beginnings of Kylo Ren in the show Ahsoka. So, the Knights of Ren are a group of dark side using marauders from the unknown regions.
Wait, what do you mean unknown regions? Like Detroit?
No, Detroit? Why would it be Detroit?
I don't know, I just hear people talking about Detroit sometimes.
No, well, okay, in the Star Wars universe, only a portion of their galaxy is called known space. Now, there is a vast swath of the galaxy that is unknown. It's super difficult to travel there because thousands of years ago, there was some kind of natural disaster that damaged hyperspace. So now, normal hyperdrives cannot navigate all these weird anomalies that they call the chaos. So this is the reason where Thrawn is from, and where Ezra and Thrawn were warped off to at the end of Star Wars Rebels, but more on that later. Now, in many ways, the Knights of Ren are like anti-Mandos. They're space Vikings that adhere to a specific moral code, which they call the Ren.
Ooh, so what's the Ren? Like that guy in Footloose?
No, the Ren is a few things. It's the name of the group's original leader, but it's also the name of his lightsaber, and it's the group's founding philosophy.
Perfectly not confusing.
The nature of the Ren is that of a lightsaber. It has no conscience, no morality, it just exists to cut and burn. It's been used by Jedi and Sith alike to do both good and bad things.
It's metaphorical!
So the Ren's code is that there is no code, which is ironic because they still have some pretty hardline beliefs. For starters, to be a Knight, you have to be Force sensitive and in some way have a connection to the dark side of the Force, something they refer to as being strong in the shadow. Ren, the leader, was the one most devoted to the Ren and was obsessed with the concept of a good death.
Yeah, but isn't death like always a bad thing?
No. Many cultures believe that there are honorable ways to die. For instance, the samurai, who inspired so much of Star Wars lore. However, the idea of an honorable death in samurai culture was seppuku, a ritualistic, self-induced unaliving that was meant to rob your enemy of victory. But the Knights of Ren view a good death with a bit more nuance.
Nuanced? Well, I think you just nuanced them to death.
Their ideas seem more rooted in Norse mythology, where a good death against a worthy opponent granted you a seat in Valhalla.
Hate to break it to you, but for a warrior to get into Valhalla, you have to die in the battle.
Similarly, in order to join the Knights of Ren, you had to facilitate a good death against a worthy opponent or a family member in order to prove your loyalty.
Wow, so they really are space Vikings.
They really are, and they have just as intimidating of a reputation. Under Ren, they were very active in the Imperial era and even aligned themselves with Kira in the Crimson Dawn.
Kira, Han Solo's ex-girlfriend?
Yes! At the end of Solo, we see her meeting up with Maul, who is the leader of the criminal syndicate known as Crimson Dawn.
Kira, you and I will be working much more closely from now on.
After Maul's death, she leads the group to a crusade to take out Palpatine and the Empire, and she recruited the Knights of Ren to help trap the Emperor and Vader in a special Sith-proof cage. However, the Knights were worried about Palpatine's retaliation if things went wrong, so they bailed at the last minute.
We're actually heading off now.
So where does Adam Driver fit into all of this?
Well, not too much is known about the Knights directly after the fall of the Empire, but we do know that sometime around 20 ADY, that's after the Battle of Yavin, Luke Skywalker and Ben Solo fought off the Knights of Ren when they were trying to invade a Jedi outpost on Elfrana. Luke easily mops the floor with them, and eventually Ren told his boys to back off, but just before doing so, he told young Ben Solo that he senses the shadow in him, and extends him an invitation to join the Knights.
I guess you can join up with us if you want. Yeah, we're gonna go to the graveyard and write poems about death and how pointless life is.
He then learns that his grandfather was the Darth Vader, but only after this information was made public by one of his mother's political opponents in an attempt to smear her, which is covered in the fantastic Claudia Gray novel Bloodline, which really is essential reading for any Star Wars fans. So all of this infuriates Ben Solo, connecting him closer to the dark side.
I have transformed myself into something dark.
This causes Luke to sense the darkness in him as well, eventually leading to the controversial scene from The Last Jedi where Luke almost puts him down. So now, with all that context, both Luke and Ben's reactions probably make a lot more sense to you. I really wish that the sequel trilogy had been planned out and that all of that was somehow addressed in the movies. Ben then goes nuts, burns down the temple, and returns to take the Knights of Ren up on their offer. He climbed their ranks and eventually became their leader after taking down Ren himself.
So now, who's the bad guy?
Well, that is very cool. But what does that have to do with Ahsoka?
Well, potentially a lot.
The whole plot thing.
For starters, as we have said in almost every Ahsoka video we've done, the plot of Ahsoka is going to revolve around Grand Admiral Thrawn, whom we last saw with Ezra Bridger warping off into the unknown regions on the back of a teleporting space whale, the Purrgil, and all this happened at the end of Star Wars Rebels. Now, like I said, navigating through the unknown regions is impossible with normal hyperspace computers, which is probably why we haven't heard much from Thrawn for the entirety of the Galactic Civil War.
Where are we right now?
However, navigating the unknown regions is not an issue for the Knights of Ren. In fact, it's what they're known for. While little is known about exactly how they do this, I've got a few ideas. There are a few shots in the trailers featuring this holographic planetarium with visible stage lighting that seems to be an obvious plot point for the series. One guess is that this could be a Stargate.
Starring young James Spader and Kurt Russell.
Different Stargate. The Star Wars Stargate, if you will.
Well, what's the difference?
Well, we actually talked about this in another video, but essentially, Stargates are the OG hyperdrives. They allowed people or objects to travel across the universe by entering hyperspace.
Oh yeah, that's the alternate dimension where they all fly when Harrison Ford yells, "Punch it, Chewie."
Correct. Dude, you're getting really good at this stuff. High five. Stargates were a much more primitive version of hyperspace travel. Now, their routes were based on the migration paths of Purrgil, space whales who can travel through hyperspace. Because of this, Stargates would likely be the only form of hyperspace travel in and out of the unknown regions. But also, Stargate paths might even intersect with Ezra's space whales. Therefore, a Stargate is the key to finding Ezra and Thrawn.
Okay, but what does Stargates have to do with the Knights of Ren?
Well, one key difference between Stargates and hyperdrives, other than the fact that Stargates are stationary, is that they also require the Force to operate. Now, we see this in the Thrawn novels. In the unknown regions, the only way to navigate through the chaos is with a Force-sensitive navigator who can feel their way through hyperspace. So, Thrawn will need a Force user to be able to escape from Ezra and use a Stargate to return to the known galaxy. Since the Knights of Ren are Force-sensitive and they know the area very well, they seem like an obvious choice for a guide.
The right tool for the right job.
Oh, so that means the orange lightsaber duo are part of the Knights of Ren.
I think so. For starters, the Knights of Ren are not Sith. Even as Vader-obsessed as Kylo is, he doesn't consider himself a Sith, nor does he strive to be one.
I'm not like you.
We also know that both Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati, our orange lightsaber-wielding friends, are both not Sith, yet they are powerful dark side users.
Same job, different outfit.
We know that Baylan was once a Jedi that survived Order 66, and since he's not an Inquisitor but a dark side user, there is a limited number of groups that he could belong to.
Well, what if he's just doing his own thing? A real lone wolf?
Well, speaking of wolves, it is super interesting that their names, Skoll and Hati, come from Norse mythology. Hati being the wolf that chases the moon, and Skoll chases the sun. Since the Knights are essentially space Vikings, the connections to Norse mythology make this even more validating.
Man, what is it with Dave Filoni and wolves?
Right? I mean, wolves are all over Star Wars Rebels. And that's not all. We've also seen this ex-Inquisitor in the Ahsoka trailers, and recently we have learned their name, Merrick.
Okay, now why is that important?
Well, for a few reasons. For starters, most Inquisitors go by an order number plus sibling name, like the fifth brother or the second sister. The only previous exception was the Grand Inquisitor, who simply went by that title alone.
It's a good name.
It's a fake name.
Having an ex-Inquisitor with an actual name suggests that the Inquisitors have likely disbanded after the fall of the Empire, but that's not what's so interesting. In Arthurian legends, the name Merrick literally means a knight thought to be a werewolf, which is yet another wolf reference. Plus, it was also the name for the bounty hunter Imbo's pet, Anuba, which is also a famous Filoni space wolf.
There are two wolves inside of you, and both of them are written by Dave Filoni.
Now, the wolf reference could be a symbolic connection to Ezra, since he is the king of Lothlorien plot armor, or it could be even more metaphorical. In many ways, wolves embody the Ren. They're seen as both noble in certain situations and evil in others. They also fight as a pack and look after one another just like the knights do. So the whole wolf thing could just be an overused metaphor for their moral independence and familial bond, just like the Knights of Ren.
There were two of us in the wolf pack. I was alone first in the pack, and then Doug joined in later.
Or maybe Filoni's a furry?
I really love
wolves.
And there's another possible explanation for Merrick's name. It could be Galen Merrick.
Oh my goodness, no way!
Wait, you actually know who that is?
No, I just wanted to feel like I was part of the conversation.
Galen Merrick is the legendary Star Killer. He was Vader's secret apprentice in the Force Unleashed series. He is an incredibly powerful Force user and has brought Vader to his knees more than once.
I beat it before, and I'll beat it again.
Now, those games deserve their own video about them, but the story has a lot of ways it could fit in. While Starkiller dies as a martyr for the rebellion in the first game,
are we ready to finish what he started? Then at last, the Rebel Alliance is born.
The sequel opens plenty of doors, as we learn that Merrick's body is used to make one of the first successful Force-sensitive clones. The Sith ending for the sequel even gives us a perfected Merrick clone at the end of the game. Now, those games are technically non-canon. By having an apprentice, Vader is in violation of the Sith rule of two, that there can only be two Sith at once.
One to hold power, and the other to crave it.
Exactly. So, if Vader wanted to keep him a secret, he could easily slap a mask on him and throw him in with the rest of the Inquisitors. It also doesn't hurt that Starkiller is played by Sam Witwer, who was Dave Filoni's Darth Maul and is himself a huge Star Wars fan. Now, Galen Merrick would be an exceptional pick for Ahsoka too. I mean, seriously, seeing both Anakin and Vader's apprentices go toe-to-toe would be incredible, and they have a lot of parallels, as both of them feel betrayed by the Force philosophies they were raised in.
We actually have a lot in common.
Starkiller also has a strong connection to the Shadow, which would make him a prime candidate for the Knights as well. It all works out.
But like you said, that game is no longer canon, and full of plot holes.
Oh yeah, they would totally have to tweak his origin. Like Merrick's clone is made on Kamino, despite the fact that Kamino was already destroyed in the Bad Batch. Plus, it'd also be really hard to believe that it took Palpatine as long as it did to create a Force-sensitive clone, while Vader just had them flying off the assembly line. It's a slim chance that all of Starkiller's story will ever be canonized. But I can dream, right?
Yeah, fair enough, man.
We also know that Merrick, Skull, and Hati work for Morgan Elsbeth, the Magistrate, the same Magistrate that we saw in Ahsoka's introductory episode of The Mandalorian. Now, given her red robes and her tragic backstory, including the death of her homeworld, many have assumed that she is from Dathomir.
That's a what?
The spooky red planet from Fallen Order and the Clone Wars, the home of Darth Maul and the Night Sisters. Now, the Night Sisters are magical space witches and super powerful dark side users. General Grievous and his droids wiped them out at the end of the Clone Wars, but before that, they were a force to be reckoned with. They also wore a lot of red, like the Magistrate, so it's certainly a safe assumption.
Here, you guys are all dressed alike. You obviously know each other.
And if that wasn't enough, though, a hairdresser from that episode of The Mandalorian all but confirmed it in a since-deleted IG post calling her the last survivor of Dathomir.
Well, you could have led with that then, but why is her homeworld so important?
Well, as we discussed earlier, the Knights of Ren, for a while, worked with Crimson Dawn. They mainly interacted with the group while Kira was in charge, but its former leader, Maul, used Dathomir as a base of operations for years. With both Morgan and Crimson Dawn on Dathomir at the same time, it could explain her knowledge of the Knights of Ren and their power.
So if we do see the Knights of Ren in Ahsoka, does that mean we're also going to see Kylo Ren?
I doubt it. You see, Ahsoka takes place in 11 ABY, and we know that Ben doesn't even begin his training with Luke until 15 ABY. Ben Solo is more than 10 years away from even meeting the Knights of Ren, let alone joining them.
He is still a child!
However, there's a lot that we don't know about the Knights of Ren, particularly during this period. Now, we do know that all of the current dark side users we have seen from the trailers are all distinctly not Sith, so it's very possible that they are either current or future members of the clan.
One of us.
Their unique connection to the dark side may even be a possible explanation for their orange lightsabers.
But then why would Kylo Ren's lightsaber be red?
Great point, Doug. The lightsaber actually has its own unique origin, but essentially it becomes the Ren, just like the lightsaber that Ren, the person, wielded before him. The rest of the Knights also have their own unique weapons, so the color of the lightsaber blade may not be uniform among this group. Just like they did with Kylo, the Knights are more than willing to take in ex-Jedi or even former light side users, as long as they have some connection to the Shadow.
Okay, so why are their lightsabers orange?
Hopefully we'll get an explanation for that, but if Mace Windu's purple lightsaber is any precedent, we probably won't.
This is so frustrating. kidding. He just told me I have to carry this javelin for a reason, but he didn't say why.
But there are a few things that it could mean. For starters, in the Legends comics, people who had lightsabers were typically labeled as Gray Jedi.
Because they all turn gray?
No, it's not an official term, but there are essentially Force users who could use both sides of the Force and adhere to no specific philosophy.
Oh, not dark or light, just gray. That makes sense to me.
No, it's actually kind of a dumb idea because Jedi follow the light, so there's no such thing as a Gray Jedi. Gray Jedi are not canon. In fact, Freddie Prinze Jr. even mentions this in his famous Star Wars rant.
There's no gray. There's no, that's pretend fan fiction shit, which is cool, but don't try to canonize it.
But there is something to the idea of former Jedi with just a hint of the dark side wielding orange lightsabers. In fact, Jedi Survivor even validates that. Now, if you didn't play the game, check out our recap, but basically, one of the main villains of the series is a former High Republic Jedi named Dagan Gera. Right as he is doing his first big dramatic evil villain speech, we watch him bleed his yellow lightsaber crystal into blood orange, just like our new friends in Ahsoka. Now, Dagan Gera was also a video game boss, so his powers are a bit exaggerated for dramatic effect. But even so, Dagan was incredibly strong. His access to the dark side allowed him to create force illusions, a ghost arm, and even flip gravity. You see, lightsabers are powered by a kyber crystal. We see this all through the Clone Wars and all through different Star Wars. The reason Sith lightsabers are red is because the Sith Lord has to bleed the kyber crystal, essentially corrupting it so whatever color it was before becomes red. So the orange coloring of these lightsabers could simply result from bleeding a yellow lightsaber, since Dagan's example is the first time we've seen that. But it would also make sense metaphorically as well. Yellow sabers were more common in the High Republic and belonged to the most devout of the Jedi Order. Turning orange after their bleed could be symbolic of the user's strength in both sides of the Force, which would make them perfect additions to the Knights of Ren's arsenal.
You belong with us, kid.
Now, despite Gray Jedi being a dumb idea and not an official term, it's also been one that's been pinned to Ahsoka in more than a few online forums. So having a villain who embodies that idea from the other side of the Force kind of makes sense. And this would also give a little extra context as to why Ezra heard Kylo's voice from the future when he visited the world between worlds. Especially since it was Ahsoka who finally connected with him in that place. Clearly, there are many reasons why the Knights of Ren could pop up in Ahsoka, and all the new baddies we've met seem so far to be perfect fits for the Knights of Ren, which is why we think they may just be Thrawn's best tickets back to the known galaxy. It also fits in with how these shows are all about the rise of the First Order and filling in all of the plot holes created by the sequel trilogy. Who knows, maybe someday we'll even look back on this.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
And we'll say, ah, yeah, that's great. That made sense. Well, guys, that's our thoughts, but what do you think? Will the Knights of Ren be a linchpin of the plot of Ahsoka? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.